Hello, my dear children. Guess who's back in a house? Kills click clack kitty clack. This is Father Andrew, and welcome back to Psycholinguistics 101. Today we will be talking about the psycholinguistic architecture of consciousness, or why every conscious is a prism. So, first of all, why a prism? Let's drag our window to the right. So why a prism? First of all, Vygotsky's переживания. Although I'm going to replace this word moving forward to impression, just because I feel like it encapsulates Vygotsky's ideas without using Russian language. Because, well, let me remind you that I'm Ukrainian and Russians are currently waging a war for almost 4 years now. And yeah, it's, to say the least, an unpleasant experience, but well, let's move forward. So, neural filtering, reception, perception, deception, integrative models, clinical and developmental implications, and we will ponder upon a paradox and we'll have some takeaways. Okay, cool. Let's move forward then. And we are starting with a meme. The greatest research skill you can have is being a nosy bitch who wants to find out. Yes. Okay. Moving forward. So, why did I choose a prism metaphor? I will give a little of a backstory. So, I was pondering about the consciousness itself, and it's, well, and based on one of the greatest albums by Pink Floyd, you are getting which one I'm referencing. The prism is a piece of glass shaped that way to refract a single beam of light into the spectrum of visible colors. And so, a prism both clarifies, meaning that it reveals colors, and distorts, it bends the light. So you can think of consciousness like this. It clarifies subjective reality while inevitably filtering and warping the input. So in our previous lecture we spoke about how thoughts can be internalized, externalized, how they are based on the input from the outside, but today we are looking at what's between the input, the external input, and internalized or externalized output. So, the prism sets a triadic architecture. Triadic, for those who don't know, means that it's made up of three. So, first of all, there is reception, then there is the act of perception, and an additional layer of deception. So let's take a look at, first of all, at Vygotsky's переживания, which is impression. So переживания for him is the psychological prism through which environment is refracted. So it typically, for Vygotsky and his understanding, it functions as an aperceptual organ of selection, which shapes the development. So he was studying basically children, and so he was curious about how does impression alter the perception. So, new word of the day, aperception, which is the mental process by which a person makes sense of an idea by assimilating it to the body of ideas they already possess. So, fully conscious perception, an immediate perception of a unity lying beyond, meaning that perception finds what's interesting to it and integrates it into its own constellation of ideas. Okay, sounds cool. Let's move forward. Okay, so it also, Vygotsky's переживания, in my system it's impression, it replaces the mirror metaphor, because up to now mirror has been the primary metaphor for representing the consciousness itself meaning that we all perceive our own reflections in the world. But unfortunately, or luckily for us, perception, it's not as simple as just a mirror. If we all been just mirrors, then we would assimilate easily. Monkey see, monkey do what does a monkey do, and monkey is good monkey in the eyes of the other monkey. But it's not as simple as that. It's a refraction of the information that enters the conscious prism. And because of that, we are so unique. Each individual on this planet Earth is unique. Because their consciousness integrated what it has seen, heard, perceived into its own constellation of knowledge, which then is being reflected, and not even reflected, refracted into an output which corresponds to the person's psyche. So key takeaway from Vygotsky's Переживания is nothing reaches the psyche unfiltered, and that would be the main idea for this lecture. Moving forward, neurobiological substrate of filtering. So, prefrontal cortex, which we remember, and developing somewhere around 24 to 26 year mark in person's life, and that's when the majority of cognitive biases ends up developing, and based on those conscious biases, the level of deception is being created. Because before that age, we wander in the world looking for what resonates with us, and once we find this vast amount of personal references, then we become whole, we become integrated as selves. And so, prefrontal cortex, let's remember it's in the front, acts as a gate for sensory streams. It allocates selective attention. Selective attention meaning that monkey would like to see what monkey want to see, and not what monkey doesn't want to see. Okay. Conscious perception requires brain-wide information integration, yet is capacity limited. In our previous lecture, we've grasped what this brain-wide information integration is, because to form a coherent structure, a coherent thought structure, one's brain must combine various elements that are scattered in the brain into a coherent structure. Cool. My fucking god, it's hot in here. And yes, Father's recording this lecture not from his home. Where is he? Oh my god, try to keep up. And another takeaway is that salience landscaping turns raw data into meaningful priorities. So what is salience? The quality of being particularly noticeable or important. Prominence. So, prominence landscaping, importance landscaping, meaning that raw data, which is the impression from the outside, and there is a beautiful metaphor, not even metaphor, but just a piece of knowledge that I like to remember, is that inside of the brain, on the skull itself, there are impressio digitalis, meaning that finger impressions, just some small impressions in the hard bone of the skull in the shape of fingers. It's like your brain has been touching its skull all this time and leaving its marks on the skeleton itself. Okay, cool. I think we've already covered everything that we wanted to cover. Let's move forward. So, reception, the first input layer. So, pre-reflective self-awareness precedes explicit thought. So, before even the thought is formed in the brain, there is already pre-reflective filtering happening in the brain. So, multimodal sensory convergence binds disparate channels into coherent moments, meaning that whenever you receive information, it might be visual, auditory, uh, tastes, olfactory, let's call it that, olfactory information, other types of senses, etc., which are then integrated into a single stream of information, which is already at that level being mm, being um, being what? Being refracted and filtered into what the brain thinks is important. Knowledge and value filters decide what gets in. So, if you typically like to learn visually, then you would create visual materials for you to easily study. If you're an auditory primarily learner, then you listen to podcasts, you listen to some content, etc. etc. So, knowledge and value filters decide what gets in. Cool. Perception, the second level, or the constructive cognition. So, first of all, reality is assembled in the brain via schemas, expectations, and metaphors. Let's remember one of the key ideas is that a symbol is a carrier of meaning. Meaning and metaphor is the collection of symbols, which are then integrated into a coherent knowledge element, which is then being integrated or externalized. Okay, mental filtering by Aaron Beck highlights negatives or confirms biases. So, mental filtering says that what it's perceiving is either good or not, either negative, meaning that it can be discarded, or something that we already know, which to be trusted. And so, language anchored metaphors both illuminate and limit our grasp of abstractions, because to form a coherent thought, one must exclude elements that might make the knowledge element either more heavy or less reliable, or anything else, any other grade that the brain might give to the knowledge element itself, or the knowledge construction in the brain. Okay, let's move forward to deception, or the self-protective distortion. So, self-deception recruits anterior medial prefrontal cortex to sustain favorable illusions, and that's why you kind of end up fully growing whenever you're 25 to 27. With children nowadays, it's even earlier than that, but well, it's to be studied for some behavioral psychotherapists, etc. So, this prefrontal cortex neural network is present to sustain favorable illusions. Evolutionary angle of deception. It reduces social cost of overt lying and maintains motivation. So we lie to ourselves because because it truly does maintain motivation. If everyone starts thinking that life is not worth living, like if everyone gets depressed and starts perceiving the objective world through the negative lens, which is kind of valid because the world is not a pleasant place to live in, you know? Capitalism made us all poor, as Marina has sung. Um, Nothing matters anymore. The god is dead, etc. And so the brain uses these good lies to keep us moving forward, which is important, of course. But it manifests as confirmation biases, self serving biases, and attribution errors. So, okay, my laptop is heating up. My god. Oh, okay, we need to cool it down, so pause. Okay, we are back in the house where it's a bit cooler, so that laptop can continue recording. And we were talking about deception. So the brain uses these good lies to just keep us moving forward. And it uses also attribution errors, meaning that it thinks something is more important than what objectively is important. And by objectively, I mean that has been collectively, by collective, slash subconscious, decided as correct or true, if we are talking from a philosophical standpoint. Yeah, thanks. Okay, moving forward. Oh no! Everything is broken. Let's get back. So, unified architecture and global workspace. So, consciousness is information producing system and not just a transmitter, because if we were only transmitters, then there would be no new information. Just we would be relating external inputs in and out, in and out, in and out, without producing anything substantially new. Global workspace theory, or GWT, means and explores that the content becomes conscious when broadcasted across widely distributed networks. So imagine it being as an entry point through which information gets in, gets refracted, and then it gets distributed to various points in the brain to gather more knowledge. Cool. Reception, perception, and deception operate within this workspace. And what's interesting is that they are all compete for the spotlight. So, for example, you might trust your eyes more than your own brain, which means relying on reception. Perception means that your inner eye is your source of truth or the gut instinct. And deception, meaning your confirmation biases, are what's important to you. And then you just become conservative in terms of knowledge gathering, knowledge getting. Cool. The clarity distortion paradox. So, we've got to the paradox part. So, like white light splits into colors, consciousness reveals hidden structure and fragments unity. In one of our later lectures, we're going to be discussing the paradox of apophenia, meaning that the tendency of the brain to perceive meaningful structures in unrelated things. So it creates new knowledge based on the unobvious connections between objectively unrelated things. The brain perceives structure in what's not structured. And back when I was studying world literature in Chernovitz National University, on one of the first lectures on theory of literature, the great professor Olha Czerwinska said that cosmos is a structured universe. Kosmos to porядkowany chaos. Cosmos is an organized chaos. And that's where apophenia comes in, that's where the clarity distortion paradox comes in, because rich phenomenal certainty masks vast unseen processing. What does that mean? Whenever you are certain that you are right, that what you've integrated is correct, then you become the carrier of knowledge. And whether you externalize it, meaning convey it to others or get it translated into media, or integrate it into internal knowledge. And that's, this certainty is just masking the processing that's taking place without our awareness. And so, accepting this paradox is a key to realistic self knowledge. And realistic self knowledge allows us to become better selves. Because when we are aware of the internal mechanisms and the external mechanisms, then we can start seeing where I end and you begin. The barrier is the ultimate threshold of anything. There is an old saying that sacred is defined by the barrier around it. So whatever is societally decided as sacred, either it be Christianity, Islam, or other religions, or some institutions, civil institutions, they are considered sacred, meaning that they are to be believed in and not to be destroyed. Okay, cool. Let's move forward. Developmental and clinical implications. So we'll start with therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy, it regrinds the prism. It identifies distortions, teaches balanced refraction. So meaning that the psychotherapist would advise you on what's best to do and what's best not to do. Education. Cultural tools such as language and narrative reshape children's impressions and alter future filtering made by children. So that's why educating children is important. Period. Full stop. And neurorehabilitation, it targets attentional networks. Targeting attentional networks may widen or refine the receptive aperture. And here, the aperture is that inner eye, inner opening, inner barrier that is perceiving the external inside. Cool. Okay, so multiple perspectives. We've got 3 perspectives to integrate. So let's start with cultural historical. Let's do it like this. Cultural historical, or the works of Lev Vygotsky. So what do? They explain socio-cultural shaping of prism, and its limitation is that, well, he was limited by what the science knew back then, and science knew not much about neurons and neuronal networks and etc. brain related. And so his cultural historical model gives less detail on neural mechanisms. So moving to psychology, which is cognitive behavioral model, its contribution is actionable techniques to modify distortions, but its limitation is that it may neglect deep embodiment and emotion, so meaning that it doesn't see some hidden internal mechanisms that prevent the desired outcome. And neuroscientific lens, its contribution is mapping the circuitry in the brain and integrating all of the different knowledge pieces into a single one, into a single source of, well, not even a source of truth, but rather that we are able to see how the brain works. And its limitation is hard problem of qualia remains. What's qualia, you might ask? Qualia is the internal and subjective component of sense perceptions arising from stimulation of the senses by phenomena. So, internal, subjective component of sense perceptions arising from the stimulation of this aperture. Aperture might be an eye, an ear, mouth, nose, skin. This is the barrier that receives information. Okay, got a couple more slides to go through and future questions. So, how do large language model interfaces uh, how do large language model interfaces influence our personal prisms? So this presentation has been made by AI based on the article, not on this article, but rather on this article. And for those who are keeping attention, there is a drunk karaoke video. Just saying. Whoever's interested will get to see me singing while being drunk. Isn't it fun? Isn't it what people like to see? Yes. Okay, let's continue. So, how do these model interfaces influence our personal prisms? I think it introduces a new way of thinking about ourselves, as throughout the centuries it has been, that whenever a new big thing comes, such as, for example, trains or the car or the internet, and now it's large language models, it changes our way of thinking about our own thinking, our own mental model. Okay, next question. Can non-invasive neuromodulation recalibrate deceptive filters without harming adaptive optimism? My personal view, yes. It depends on the system that you are non-invasively, well, relatively invasively modulate. For example, cannabinoid system or the dopamine system or the serotonin system. What if this therapy, this modulation is conscious and augmented by external stimuli in form of various drugs? And do infant sensory interventions change lifelong impression trajectories? In my opinion, they do. We already see the problem with the dopamine system in the children just because they've been given the technology too early in their lives, and because of that, they are unable to focus their attention for longer than 30 seconds, probably even less. And it's a huge issue in the academia and in the school systems just because the teachers don't really know what to do with that and how to tackle this challenge, but it's for us to solve moving forward. And key takeaways. So, consciousness is active, selective, and self editing. So, meaning perception, reception, deception. The prism metaphor, it unifies psychological, linguistic, and neural evidence, which we've covered before. And growth involves reshaping the prism, but not erasing it. If we erase the prism, we erase the person. So, what we as psychology experts, what we are trying to achieve by reshaping of the prism is to grind the rough edges into the stable ones. And that's what's important, for the person to become stable in themselves. Cool. And food for thoughts. If perception is always partly deception, what is authenticity then? Is it the biases? Is it the inner eye? What's authentic in there? In my personal view, it's a triad which itself, every element of it, is unique and authentic in itself, and then whenever the information gets through the prism, it refracts in a unique way, because everyone is unique, and thus everyone is authentically themselves. It just might not be evident for some where their authenticity lies. And that's the end of this lecture. Thank you for tuning in. And may you have a great day. Love you all. And yeah, like, comment, and subscribe, like all of that. And yeah, see you soon. XOXO. I'm out.